Hi, everyone. My name is Adi, and today we've got a special guest, Gavin Michaels. Gavin, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Audie. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name's Gavin. Past Pokemon accomplishments include winning nationals way back in 2013 and winning a couple pair regionals. I just
Yeah.
graduated from University of Southern California.
You are the California National Champion as well,
Exactly.
after winning back-to-back California regionals back in 2017. And of course, you also did pretty well in the Players' Cup over the last 3 weeks. How did you finish in that tournament?
I ended up finishing ninth total. Well, it's like double elimination means it's tied for ninth, which means that I get to round up that 12 to a nice nine.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Players' Cup is a 256-player double elimination tournament hosted by the Pokemon Company International, with invites extended to the top players from the May International Challenge. We're going to have 8 of the top 16 players from this tournament come onto the channel to talk about their teams, so make sure to subscribe to not miss a single one. Gavin, you used one of the most interesting teams in the tournament. Tell me a little bit about the 6 Pokemon that you used.
Sure. So Uh, the team's kind of like main defining bits, I think, are two Jumon cores, which are Clefairy Diggersby and Arcanine Duraludon. What I like about Clefairy Diggersby is you've seen a lot of teams that utilize Clefairy and Porygon Z, right? With the
Mhm.
idea being that, okay, you have all of this offense coming in from Porygon Z, and then Clefairy helps with helping hand boosts, with giving it more bulk and going for Follow Me. What I like about Diggersby, though, as opposed to Porygon Z, is the dual type coverage with both Max Strike and Max Quake, since that allows Diggersby and Clefairy to sort of bulk up to impend like an incoming storm of damage. And I think it's especially useful when like if you're using Clefairy, Steel types are pretty annoying. So having the Max Quake to just get rid of that really helpful in my opinion. The other main core was Arcanine Duraludon, which I utilized an Assault Vest Arcanine which is decently bulky, but the main thing you use it for is you get all four of those strong attacking moves. Or, well, not strong in the case of Bulldoze, but useful. And what I did was I would use Bulldoze to activate my Duraludon's weakness policy, get it to +2 special attack, and then just do crazy damage. So the idea with the team is really just like output as much damage as humanly possible. That's why the fifth Mon on the team is Spec Sylveon, which outputs. I'm pretty sure like it's the most DPS, if you want to phrase it like that, of any Pokemon in the format, since it hits both of the opponent's Pokemon so hard with Spec's Hyper Voice.
And what does that? What does DPS mean?
Damage per second. So Sylveon does more damage with the button press than any other Pokemon that isn't maxed. Probably.
Sure. With that or Dracovish, what are those two?
Oh, that is true. That is true. Yeah. Whimsicott is just there as a general utility mon. That slot used to be a Rotom Wash, but since I found myself mainly using that spot for speed control anyways, I decided to opt into Whimsicott since it's the best speed control mon in the format.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a team that, it doesn't look like it has too many additions from the Isle of Armor. So tell me about the process of building this team.
So all the way back in Series 4, it was 11 p.m. and I had an idea strike me of Clefairy and Diggersby. So I messaged you and Chuppa about it, and neither of you guys said anything. So I saw Nick sitting Nails sitting alone in voice call, and hopped in and said, "Nails, nails, nails! I have an idea. Clefairy Diggersby." And he said, "All right, let's do it." So then what we did was we just started throwing random sets onto it just to see like what would stick and what wouldn't. So we had some good ideas, like we had Assault Vest Arcanine stuck in pretty early, Choice Spec Sylveon. We had some bad ideas, like Choice Scarf Butterfree. Um, God, what else? We had really fast Eerie Impulse Rotom Wash that didn't end up working too well. And we just sort of like ended up cycling through everything until we ended up climbing to basically the top of the ladder in one night. Um, then we said, okay, this team is something. We struggled a bit with finding the last slot for a little bit, but Anil Shahar recommended weakness policy Duraludon to go with the Bulldoze on Arcanine, which is something that a bunch of people used all the way back in Dallas. I think that was first started by Justin Krubau, a Magikarp. So that's sort of like how the team came together, with just sort of slapping random things on together and then realizing, oh, okay, all of these really weird different Pokemon have good synergy together.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, you built this team in Series 4
Yep.
and topped the ladder with it in Series 4. How much did you have to change the team to respond to the new threats in the Isle of Armor?
I think the main change that I made to the team is I changed Diggersby move order so that high horsepower was before Giga Impact. I think besides that, everything else stayed the same.
You had to change the move order so that if you timed out, is that right?
That's literally the only change I made, I think.
That's incredible. So you really built one of the best Series 5 teams a month before we learned about the metagame.
Yeah, no, I mean, like the thing is, the team was doing super well against a lot of Whimsicott Cinderace stuff, you know? It was like really doing its job. And when all the Series 5 mons came out, I look at the list and I was just like, I don't know if I care about any of these. You know? Like, I'm like, oh no, rain against my Duraludon. Ah! And like Maxquake from Diggersby was really useful against a lot of the new really hard hitting special threats like Expanding Force.
Sure.
And also the main like boon to my team, I think, is that my least favorite matchup, which was Whimsicott Lapras stuff, really died down.
Right. And Lapras teams, like my own, started to get a lot bulkier and try to use Comfy, and really try to exploit the healing that Rillaboom allowed them to get. I noticed that Diggersby, of course, seems pretty weak to Rillaboom, at least to me. Did you ever have problems with that?
Yeah, I mean, like when it comes to Rillaboom, I think it's a tricky mon for every team. I just sort of relied on the fact that I did have some tools that were really strong against it. So the Arcanine is one of the better counters to Rillaboom in the game, I think, just because if Flare Blitz doesn't Oko the Rillaboom, the Extreme Speed definitely will. Like afterwards. Um, the Duraludon really walls out Rillaboom, so that's something that's like inherently really scary for them. And then also, Clefairy is so bulky that Grassy Glide is a 3 a KO on it. Friend Guard up, Grassy Glide isn't doing that much to Diggersby, and plus, Diggersby can just Oko it with a Max Strike.
Wow, that's impressive. It just is a testament to the raw damage output that Diggersby gives you. So, talk me through some of the individual sets and EV spreads and why you chose the specific moves and EVs that you did.
Okay, so let's talk about Clefairy first because it's the most important one. Um, 252, 252 because that's just what you do. Uh, and then Clefairy has Sing because Sing is such a good move.
It really is.
Like the reason I like Sing so much is against passive teams. If you can really click Sing a lot of the time, and against really aggressive teams, you can pretty much always find a way to just sneak a Sing in there and just like kind of ruin their game plan. Something that I would do a lot is lead Clefairy Diggersby, and then people see that and they target their move slots into the Diggersby because okay, the Clefairy could go for a follow me, so it would go into the Clefairy then, or it could go for a helping hand, in which case you want to like target down the Diggersby, or the Clefairy could even protect. Sing makes it so that you really punish that, so they double into the Diggersby, and you get a 55% chance of just winning the game.
Right. And so, uh, I remember that back in, I think it was Series 3, you built a team with Dragapult Clefairy, and that kind of took a little while, but after a, a month, and I think after I won the Rose Tower Challenge with it, and then Yuri won a Rose Tower Clash with it, it became one of the biggest threats in the meta. You really built that team like 2 months before we started doing big things with it. But after I won that tournament, my manager for NPA, David Mazzari, aka Platypus, told me, "Congrats on your run, but you're running Clefairy all wrong." because we had after you on the Clefairy to help our Trick Room matchup, and he said Sing is just so much better because of the passive turns that Clefairy has, and we just ran with it, and it's been incredible ever since
Yeah, exactly. Like you really you never know like how many turns you can click sing with until you try to maximize the amount of turns you're clicking sing with it.
I remember when we were playing some test games against my team, you managed to click Sing 8 times,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
and you just have to hit 4 of them, right? And that's the expected value, and it just absolutely stopped me from being able to play the game. That's all you need to
I had 4 of them. That's actually under the expected value.
do. True. So
Sing's 55% accurate, which means that if you miss, you got unlucky.
you got hacked out.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I view it. But yeah, no. Clefairy really punishes like passive teams. I mean, the whole idea with this team is like really aggressively punish passive teams because I have better damage output. Like I have crazy damage output. I punish passivity, and it's just like you set up a wall, and I brought a sledgehammer, and then against like more aggressive teams, I had to like play more carefully. But that's just like sort of how you have to play against aggressive teams in general, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So tell me about the other slots in your team.
Yeah, I think that the Arcanine's pretty interesting to talk about, just because. So the reason it ended up with this specific spread is that I think it was what Nails used back in 2017. Arcanine was just a giant ball of utility. Having the Intimidate as a switch in is super nice. Extreme Speed being +2 priority is really, really good in this format because what you can do a lot of the time is use it to pick off a Whimsicott that survived with its Focus Sash before it can go for its Prankster move.
Hmm.
So Whimsicott's a mon that like can really sometimes be reliant on like living in terms of the Focus Sash, and Extreme Speed just messes up all of those lines. Um, Bulldoze we talked about a little bit earlier is for both self proc and then also honestly, just getting those -1 speed drops, it was really useful just because I was much more used to like knowing like what outsped what after -1 drops than my opponents would be, you know? So it's little stuff that like it's like, okay, so my neutral mon outruns their mon at -1, but if I'm at -2 and they're at -1, then I outspeed it, and it's just ways that you can like really just like get surprise your opponent, even though they see your team, they just like can't do the mental math because like they haven't like thought about it. And it's just like it's something that you get a big advantage in if you are prepping more.
Yeah, that's definitely a really important interaction that I think is lost to some newer players. Is that the difference between one Pokemon at -1 and one Pokemon at neutral speed is different from the difference between that same Pokemon at -1 and the other Pokemon at -2 speed. And so there's a lot of times, like you said, that the Pokemon will be faster at neutral speed than the other one at -1, and not when it's at -1, the other one's at -2. That's a little abstract. I'm trying to think of a concrete example. Do you have a concrete example off the top of your head?
Yeah, no. Andrew Ding's Primarina. So his Primarina hit 90 speed. My Diggersby was at hits 130 speed. So after a Cinderace could use a max strike, then that would bring my Diggersby down to 130 times 2/3, which is like 86 speed, right? So slower than the 90 speed.
Hmm.
If I'm able to get a Bulldoze off beforehand, because my Arcanine is still faster than the Primarina, then my Diggersby would be at -2 speed, which would be 65 speed, but the Primarina would be at -1 speed, which is 90 times 2/3, which would be 60 speed.
Right.
He can Giga Impact to make his Primarina faster than my Diggersby, but I can Bulldoze that same turn to make my Diggersby faster than the Primarina again.
Yeah, and so I guess that sort of interaction is really important. It's also important when it comes to looking at plus speed natures as well. I know that when we were running Clefairy Dragapult, we were clicking max airstream a lot, and the difference between +1 and neutral is different from +2 versus +1. So these are really important small things to pay attention to when you're playing the game.
I think like in this format in particular, it just becomes so important because speed drops and speed boosts are so common. Like, I mean, just on this team, I have Arcanine's Bulldoze, Clefairy's Max Strike, and Whimsicott's Tailwind as 3 different forms of speed control. speed control in this format is really important just because of how the dynamic speed changes work. Uh, in earlier formats, if you went for a speed control option, that wouldn't be relevant until the next turn. But the fact that it's an immediate effect makes it so much more important to have those tools on your team.
And then tell me a little bit about Arcanine's partner in crime, Duraludon.
I view Duraludon as sort of like the offensive version of. There's a lot of defensive mons in VGC history where it's like, oh, you can't touch them because they just like of their weird typing. It's like you need a magic bullet in order to hit them. It's like Iron Defense Fairthorn. It's like, oh, you need to have a special fire type move, otherwise you can't do anything against me. Duraludon is kind of like that in that it's so physically bulky that you need special attacks in order to deal with it. And in this format, Earth Power is so uncommon. You don't really see like those special ground attacks basically at all. So you're really basically saying like, okay, how many strong neutral special attacks are you able to throw at me? Especially when I have redirection support in Clefairy. And that's the sort of thing where it's like, it becomes really difficult to find something that can actually deal with Duraludon that effectively. And the physical bulk means that against most of the biggest threats in the format, like Cinderace, you can just ignore them. Duraludon is just crazy good against Cinderace because of that, because you can stock up Steel Spike boost, you can go for a Wormwood, and if they try to high jump kick you or max fighting you, then they activate your weakness policy and you just kill them right back.
Yeah, this is that's really cool, and it's very reminiscent of the Magnus set that both Raghav and I used on our teams, where our Cinderace game plan really was just click Steel Spike a bunch of times and have a strong electric move to threaten them if they decide to click Max Airstream.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, you can really put the Cinderace under a lot of pressure. And what's really cool about Duraludon is because of Stalwart, you get rid of one of Cinderace's main weapons, which is that redirection support. So Cinderace never gets to feel safe against my team, which I think is a really huge boon for me.
Yeah, and if anything ever does threaten you on the physical side, you always have the Max Whirlwind too to be able to weaken them.
Yeah, like it's interesting, right? Because Excadrill is threatening the Max Quake. But if they go for the Max Quake onto the Duraludon, then they activate its weakness policy. So often what they do is they Max Quake the partner to avoid the weakness policy, and that's something that's really abusable. And also the
Sure,
Excadrill in general just really has to stockpile sword
sure.
stances to be effective against it. Going into the EVs, it outruns Adamant Dracovish, which is only useful for if you get a -1 speed drop on said Adamant Scarf Dracovish. You know?
hmm But like you said, you're getting a lot of -1 drops on this team between Max Strike and the Bulldoze.
Yeah, exactly. It was also just useful for being faster in general. I was able to win a set against Toller in Players Cup because I just leveraged my Duraludon being faster than his. It's just like, it's kind of like a speed creep number, right? Where it's like, like there's some stuff you're just always going to be slower than, but you're faster than a lot of stuff that might really hope that it's faster than you.
Sure. And that's one thing that was really interesting about this format is that there are very few things that want to be between 126, I think, speed and 140. And so how much more you want to go past that is really just up to you and how much investment you're willing to put into speed creep. And it sounds like the 2 points in this case of speed creep, or 2 or 3 points of speed creep, really paid off for you.
Yeah, it did. What it also allowed me to do was just hit a jump number in special attack, and 156 points in special defense really, really helps. So a reason why I heavily invested in special defense is a Pokemon's bulk can roughly be equivalent to its HP times its defense or its special defense stat. So how that works is if the numbers are closer to each other, so it's like 5 times 5 is more than 4 times 6, and that like generally holds true. Where it's like, if you put the boosting, if you put the EVs in the stat that's lower, you generally tend to get more bulk out of it. And Duraludon's special defense is so low that you get a lot of mileage out of putting those EVs into special defense, because it's like, it's not a difference of being slightly bulkier. It's like, okay, it's almost like you're giving it an assault vest by
Right.
just evening in special defense. And it's like,
Right.
it really makes a huge difference for those low special defense Pokemon.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit about the other options on your team.
Diggersby is just crazy strong. There's not much else to say besides the fact that it's ridiculous. Um, and it's also bulkier than people would expect with the 85, 77, 77 defenses. Like, after you get a couple of max quakes off, special attacks just don't do any damage to you. It's just really impressive.
Hmm.
Also, something that I want to note is that I have electric moves on both on Diggersby, Duraludon, and Arcanine, and I have max Starfall with Sylveon, which means all the Pokemon that I'm realistically maxing on this team have a way to make themselves immune to sleep.
That's really useful. Did that ever conflict with your Clefairy set?
Yeah, no, so I had to be really careful about when in the game I would go for it, just in terms of is like how much leverage am I getting out of Sing? But frankly, if my opponent is going for sleep-based game plans, Clefairy generally isn't going for them at the same time. Since if my opponent has a Torkoal and a Venusaur, it's really hard to get the Clefairy to hit Sing anyways, you know? So it's just like, whatever. It is something that you do have to be careful of because you don't want to go for a Max Electric because you feel like it, and then you don't have Sing to punish their passive options. So I know some people like different moves on Diggersby, specifically Bounce. I just think Giga Impact's a lot stronger to get both the stab and the 150 base power max move.
Right, and you're essentially getting the same speed control. Granted, it's only on your opponent, not on yourself, but you're still getting that -1, which is essentially the same for at least the turn.
Yeah, and it's just so much stronger, just in terms of damage output.
Right.
Or
Right.
it's like, I don't know. I think like you in this format, you really need to be threatening a lot of damage. Otherwise, your opponent can really just ignore you.
Yeah, and that's kind of the name of this team. There's a lot of scary things on the team.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, the Sylveon is just a Sylveon, and that it's choice specs, and you do the 4 damaging attacks. Um,
Hmm.
I will say, you click all 4 of the attacks much more than you might think. Hyper Beam, you can just click to just surprise Oko their Maxmon, you know?
Sure.
It's just like, it's pretty useful. It's like, if you can't afford for them to get Trick Room up, just Hyper Beam it. um, Mystical Fire is really good, especially against a lot of Lapras teams, just because you can really stack those special attack drops onto it and make an already passive mon feel like it's just doing nothing.
I used a Lapras team for this tournament, of course, and I know that that was probably the biggest weakness of Lapras teams was making it so that my Dynamax didn't do any damage, and then KOing me after I've stopped being bulky because of my Dynamax, and Mystical Fire is a really strong way to exploit that.
Um, what the spread does is outrun Cinderace and Tailwind, and then basically just a special attack dump.
Sure.
Yeah, not too much else to say about it. It's just, yeah. Something else you might notice is there's another priority move on it with Quick Attack because priority moves in this format are really good. Um,
Definitely.
I think the reason priority moves are so strong in this format is because of how the Dynamax interaction works, where essentially while your opponent is Dynamaxed, they're twice as bulky, right?
Mhm.
So a priority move is a way to like finish off a Pokemon that just finished its max. And that priority move is doing much more damage than like than a stronger attack the turn while it was Dynamaxing. That was not the best way of phrasing it, but I hope you got the idea.
Yeah, definitely. And then a lot of times you're better off not KOing a Pokemon until the next turn and KOing it before it can move because then they don't get the free switch. And that's what priority attacks do so well. That's also, I think, a big part of why Rillaboom is such a big threat, is because it has that priority Grassy Glide now.
And then the last mon is Whimsicott. Whimsicott really is the sixth mon on the team. It's there basically to click Tailwind. Um, and then Charm and Protect allow it to sort of dance around stuff. Charm is really effective against Excadrill specifically. Um,
Mhm.
because in order for Excadrill to do anything against my team, it really has to stockpile Sword Stance boosts. And you can basically really delay like how long you can really delay its max by just saying if you max you're going to be useless. it's also really effective against Cinderace because I don't think you can have a team that's too effective against Cinderace. And it's another way for me to deal with Rillaboom because obviously Grassy Glide is really scary, but -2 Grassy Glide is much less scary.
Yeah, and of course because Whimsicott is Prankster, your charms go off before the Grassy Glide, despite Grassy Glide's priority.
I opted for Protect on Whimsicott just because I feel like Protect just gives you a lot of room to make plays, um, both in terms of like making it more difficult for your opponent to have safe options, and also for giving yourself much more safe options. I know a lot of people don't really like Protect in this format, but I do think it's still very vital.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with again with Rillaboom being on every team, they're going to be able to put Fake Out into Whimsicott and neutralize it very quickly. And so, having a way to avoid that and still survive the turn, it's really important. I also thought that going into the Players Cup, because of the nature of open team sheets, if you didn't have Protect on Pokemon, your opponent was going to have very free attacks into it, and so the knowledge that your opponent has Protect on a Pokemon makes your opponent play very differently.
Exactly.
So, what would you say the biggest strengths and the biggest weaknesses of this team were?
Biggest strength of it was definitely punishing passive teams. Against teams where the main idea was to just outbulk me, I feel like if I was playing correctly, I just had significant advantages in those matchups. Um, I could output much more damage than they can, and my mons aren't as frail as some of the other mons that have high damage output.
Mhm.
Um, and that was just something that I could pretty easily leverage. The biggest weakness of it was, I'd say the main thing was the Sun matchup. The issue with the Sun matchup is I really have to get it correct which Pokemon they're going to Dynamax and when. So Arcanine is a really effective answer against Maxed Venusaur because Max Flare and Sun can Oko it. But if I commit to it too early and they just switch out into a Tyranitar, then my Dynamax is totally wasted. So I have to
Mhm.
time my Dynamax to counter their Dynamax, and if they're a good player, then they can delay it and make my life a lot harder. And I just sort of have to guess right, basically.
Right. You have a very proactive team, so having to play a little more reactively is probably goes against the nature of it.
Yeah, I'd say so. Um, I'd say the Sun matchup is the biggest weakness for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been hearing a lot of talking to players, and Sun is a scary team. Maybe it might be the best team in the format right now. We'll have to see.
I think there's a definite chance of it.
And we have another Sun team coming up with Owen Wright is going to be featuring his team, and he used a Sun team that was really cool. So look out for that on this channel. Um, so tell me a little bit about your run through the Players Cup.
Okay, so um, round one, I ended up playing against a rain team. Uh, I will say, I think day one of Players Cup was the most fun, just because you didn't have any info on it, and you were just sort of like being thrown into it. You know,
Mhm.
like day one of Players Cup is a very different experience than day two and three, where it's like you get a team and you have like 10 minutes to prepare, and then on day two and three, it's like, oh, I can get all of my opponents that I could potentially play, all of their team sheets, and then I have a week where I'm just supposed to grind practice games against it. It's a very different dynamic.
Right. And as a player who has won multiple regionals, won a nationals, you probably have a lot of experience with that preparation process, having a night to prepare for a team. How similar would you say this is pretty similar to that?
There are some similarities, but I think the big difference is that you don't have to prep as many matchups. When you're
Mhm.
going into top cut, you prep for your top 16 opponent, and then the further out they get, it's sort of like you sort of just say, maybe not, just because like you can't realistically prepare 15 different matchups. You can't run sets and practice sets and formulate a best game plan against all 15. But
Right.
against when you know you're only playing against two people, you can get really good at playing against those specific two people.
Right. Definitely.
I would equivalent. I would say there's an equivalence between like Worlds and Nats finals, where it's you really do have a night to prepare just for finals.
Mhm.
But I will say I also don't like that format very much, just because I think it leads to some very lopsided games where a player realizes they have a key matchup edge and then just click the correct buttons and the opponent can't really do anything about it.
Definitely. It definitely felt like a very different way of playing Pokemon. And I'm not sure if I prefer it. I think I agree. I think I liked day one the most, where I just got to see. I did get to see my opponent's team, and that was a very different aspect of it. But not have it like the week to prepare just changed the way that. But I think myself and my opponents played the matchups tremendously.
I think the one thing I would like to see in future versions of this is if they can make the bracket hidden.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting way of doing it.
You can pretty clearly like figure out like okay, who else is in like winner's side, who else is in loser's side, but you don't know exactly who you're going to be playing. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know. It's a thought. Anyways, my round one opponent was using a rain team with Talonflame. Uh, and I really just like heavily leveraged Duraludon against him. One thing I remember distinctly is game one, turn one. He led Talonflame Kingdra against Michael Fairy Duraludon, and I just said
Hmm.
turn one that he didn't have the guts to max form one to my Duraludon turn one, so I just protected Clefairy and went for a Thunderbolt onto Talonflame.
And it sounds like it works.
Max guard taunted, and it's just like that just sort of set the tone for the rest of the set. I think, where it's just like I had experience playing against Rain. One key advantage I think I had going into day one was that people did not know how to play against my team just because, I mean, who else are you going to play who's using a similar team?
And I think that one of the things you told me when we were talking
Uh,
about your team earlier was that your team people look at it and they might say it's very read based, but the way you described it is that you're forcing your opponent to be the one who has to make the reads. You get to make a play and you have four plays at your disposal and they have to pick which one you're making and correctly counteract that.
yeah.
Counteract that.
The way I think of it is I'm playing rock, paper, scissors, but I win on ties.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a really interesting way of team building.
Yeah. I think there are certain mons that really enable that, and Clefairy is really the big one that does that.
Hmm.
Let's see here. Round two, I played against Primitive, who was using Lapras Clefairy. One thing I remember was that his Clefairy was actually Life Dew. Game one was sort of interesting. Um, I just really remember not being too sure what to do, and then it sort of ended up in an end game where I was just relying on Sylveon to clean up. I got a crit, which kind of just ended the game, and it's one of those crits where it's like I don't know if that mattered, but I'm not going to complain about it.
Hmm.
And then game two, I just clicked Sing. Like game one, I was trying to play perfectly, and game two, I decided I'm clicking Sing.
Yeah, and Lapras is a very passive archetype, and so like I said, when we tested, I was using Lapras team. You clicked Sing 8 times against me, and it was terrifying to play against. So yeah, it definitely works, especially if you click it enough. It's not like it's that random. You're gonna hit some of them, you're gonna miss some of them, but you're gonna get a lot of advantage out of it.
Yeah, that's how I view it. And then round three, I played against Toller. Um, his team was interesting in that he also had a weakness policy to Duraludon.
Hmm.
All three games, he opted into leading Talonflame Duraludon. Game one, I went with the Clefairy Diggersby approach that worked out fairly well. I went for a Helping Hand Max Quake, traded my Clefairy for his Maximon, and was able to win with Whimsicott Sylveon Lens. One thing I realized was that if my Duraludon was faster than his Duraludon, then Arcdura would just always win. So
Sure.
I was doing calcs um, like during the set, and I realized that Duraludon needs a decent amount of bulk in order to survive a Diggersby Max Quake at +1 defense. So I made a call that if he survives the Max Quake, then my Duraludon will be faster than his. So game two, I just went for the Max Quake and he survived, and I basically just got steamrolled off of that. But that gave me the information to confidently just lead Arcanine Duraludon game three and win.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a really interesting dynamic that you got to calc in between. You could calc it in between games, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. You can just like, I mean, honestly, I think in every set I played, I was doing some calcs during the games just to like help get me some more information.
Mhm.
One thing that was
Yeah,
interesting was that like EV spreads weren't revealed, so you just sort of had to like figure that out on your own.
Right, and sometimes some mons just have very obvious EV spreads, but things like Duraludon, there's a lot of different ways that you can EV it. And so being able to figure that out during game one, game two gave you a really big advantage going into that game three.
Speaking of, my next set against Brendan Zhang, I got a lot of information from watching his set against Jake Magier. Jake Magier streamed it, and based off of just like seeing the damage rolls and everything, I could tell that his Comfy was max HP, max defense bold, and that his Lapras didn't have special attack investment. Using this information, I was able to formulate a really solid game plan, which was um, I know Max Weight can't one hit KO the Comfy, but I know Max Strike can. And uh, that game
Mhm.
or that set ended up being recorded, so people can watch that if they want. But this was a set that I did a lot of practice against, and I think that I played it enough to where I made the matchup basically unwinnable for Brendan. Just because like I knew the line so good. Like not unwinnable in that like he can like get crits and stuff, but outside of crits and freezes, it's just like I just win.
Yeah. And if you want to watch the set, it's on the Pokemon's official Twitch channel. I believe you can still find the videos. And yeah, it was game one was not particularly close. Game two was a little closer, but Gavin still managed to pull it out.
And then the next set was against Rogov. Um, with Rogov, it was a little weird just because like we're both in the same group chat, you know, and it's like you can't really ask people for practice games against and someone else in it. So I ended up basically just asking my girlfriend to help me run practice sets against this team, which pretty helpful, but it's it's different than like the intense preparation I did for Brendan. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
how this set sort of worked is game one I led Arctura into Incineroar and Teleon, which I sort of expected, and then he maxes Inteleon, which I really didn't expect, because that just didn't happen in any of the practice games I played, and I just basically got rolled off of the whatever Inteleon's max move is, just one-shotting my Arcanine turn one.
Yeah, it's just like Rillaboom's max move. G-Max Hydro Snipe has base 160 power, and also ignores Friend Guard because it has a Mold Breaker type effect. So it does a lot of damage against a team like Gavin's.
Um, game two went a little bit better in that I was just able to sing him to death.
Mhm.
Game three was fairly interesting from what I remember. I was really scared of him like putting more damage output into Clefairy, and I made a couple of misreads. And what I felt like the game really came down to was calling whether he was going to soak his Magnezone or go for the Snipe Shot or not. Um, I ended up just not really seeing the soak on the Magnezone option, so it wasn't even a read on his end so much as just like if you remember this, it's a read, and if you don't, then I win. Which fair enough.
Yeah, and if you're interested in hearing more about this set, we also have more about this team. We have Raghav's team report up on the channel as well, and he went into depth about this matchup too. This was a very, very back and forth affair with two really strong players who had put a lot of thought into it. So I wish this game was recorded because this would have been a fantastic game to watch.
Yeah. I remember a highlight of this was that at one point he soaked my Sylveon, got it to -1. It was still doing a lot of damage, and then Rillaboom didn't OHKO it with the Grassy Glide. And at one point in game three, I thought I won because I got a Flare Blitz burn on Rillaboom, but I forgot that Grassy Terrain healing goes before burn damage. Then I had to immediately just go into playing Jody, where that match
Mhm.
was streamed live while I was playing, which was kind of funny.
Yeah, and then I think the VODs for that are also available on Jody's Twitch twitch.tv/soulserve, I believe is what his Twitch channel is. And he also used a team that will be featured on this channel, made by John Evans and Nick Navarre.
Yeah. This team doesn't have a Duraludon matchup. So I sort of abused the fact that it didn't have a Duraludon matchup, basically. It's a little bit more complex than that, but Clefairy Duraludon is a really strong lead. Um, Something also to note is that uh, Arcanine Duraludon um, wins if he doesn't lead Melodic, but Clefairy Duraludon does well enough even if he does. So kind of just opted into doing that.
Sure. And so this was your first game in the losers bracket, and you won this and got into the top 16, right?
I ended up having to play against AMR, Alec Rubin. And so is this actually his paste?
This is his paste. His team report is featured on the channel as well, and so he talked a lot about his matchup with you and how the Porygon Z Duraludon matched up against your Diggersby Duraludon.
Something interesting to note about this set is I actually got incorrect information that really made me have to adjust my game plan on the fly. Um, I was told that his Togekiss had at least a roll to die to Gmax Pyro Ball from Cinderace, and which would mean it's like max HP, no defense, basically neutral nature. And as you can see with that 228 HP, 196 defense bold, that's not accurate. Um, Game one, I think I really was able to catch him off guard by maxing the Arcanine. Like I was always planning on maxing the Arcanine because it's my most consistent game plan. Um, but then the Togekiss lived to the Helping Hand Max Lightning, and I sort of had a panic moment. And I was able to win basically off of him having the incorrect Mons in pack, where he had a Rillaboom instead of an Urshifu, which Arcanine prefers fighting Rillaboom as opposed to Urshifu Rapid Strike. You know, Game two I kind of got rolled because he had Talonflame and Urshifu in back, and I was just like, I really just couldn't do anything. And I was just
Mhm.
sitting in Team Preview Game three, just thinking, he's gonna read a Protect on Clefairy. I'm just gonna sing his Porygons. So game three, turn one, I just decide I'm hitting the sing, and let me tell you, I hit that sing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of Sing, right? Even if you feel like you have a bad matchup at times, or you're not sure what to do, worst case, you just 55% of the time you just win the game.
Exactly. I sort of misplayed the end game, but I was able to win off of getting a bulldoze off onto his Urshifu, so my Duraludon was able to come in and kill it.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then um, I didn't actually practice too much for my next opponent, Andrew Ding, mainly because people were confident that he would beat Santi. So I practiced a lot against for Santi, but not so much against Andrew.
Hmm. And Santi, of course, not only beat Andrew, but also beat Jonathan Evans and made it into top four of Players Cup with a really cool Colossal team.
So I decided my game plan against Andrew was sort of switching up whether I was going Clefairy Durgasby as a lead or Arcanine Duraludon as a lead. Um, and the games were all like I don't really remember too much about them besides the fact that they were like pretty close. I remember that his Indeedee was just very bulky. It survived a Helping Hand Max Flare from Arcanine, which sort of surprised me.
Mhm.
Uh, Game one, close game, just ended up coming down to Moonblast getting a special attack drop on Duraludon, which is just like, it happens. Like, it happens so frequently that it's like, that's just sort of how Moonblast works.
Right.
And then game two, I thought I had the game like in a good spot. And then the Cinderace did way more damage than I thought it would. And it turns out that was actually Adamant Cinderace.
Oh, honestly, I didn't know that. I had to prep for Andrew as well, and I ended up beating him the next round. But I think I expected this race to be Jolly the entire time.
Yeah, no, just like that extra damage just really got me. It did enough damage to my Clefairy with Flare Blitz that my Bulldoze from my Arcanine ended up killing my Clefairy.
Oh, that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm like pretty proud of the run I had and the games I played.
Yeah, so you finished in top 12 out of 256 players, the top 256 players in North America, and you finished top 12, which is definitely very impressive. And you used such a cool team to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty happy with the run. I think this is a super fun format, and I'm glad that we had a tournament to be able to play it with.
Yeah, and so we've got the rental code up on screen right now, and the paste of this team will be in the description down below. So make sure to try it out. I hope you guys can take inspiration from this really innovative team. and learn a lot, especially from a player like Gavin, who imparted a lot of wisdom over the course of this 30 minutes. Uh, Gavin, do you have any final words or shout outs you want to give?
I just want to thank everyone who helped me prep my games, and just for like everyone who gave me support during all of this.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it, and congrats on your great finish in the Players' Cup.
Thank you.